Resident Evil 4 is one of the most influential games ever made, and in regards to its contribution for camera systems and perspectives we see applied in video games nowadays, it was the most important trendsetter since the first Doom game. They weren't the first to invent these gameplay systems, but they sure as hell made them popular. And to be fair, neither of these games simply worked because they got lucky. They were also the first to get it right. It's not just about getting these cameras to work, it's about being able to tailor the whole experience around them. The camera perspective is usually just the foundation, then there's a lot of things to build on top of that, such as fun factor, the pacing, the level design, the tone, the gameplay loops, the list goes on. RE4 was an amazing breakthrough for third-person mechanics and is still more of a well-rounded experience than even most third-person shooter games coming out today. This works out all fine and dandy for a game that's about to blow everyone's socks off in 2005, but for the upcoming remake that's rumored to be in development and has a monumental hill to climb when it comes to fans' expectations, this will hardly be a thing to boast about. There are two reasons why this won't suffice, but before we get to those, I want to know what you guys think. What camera perspective do you want Resident Evil 4 Remake to implement? And if you had to have more than one, how would you want them to work? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear them. And while we're at it, consider subscribing and leaving a like to help the channel out. With that out of the way, on to reason number one. Third-person over-the-shoulder camera is everywhere. There's an oversaturation in the industry right now. You know what I'm talking about. Every game these days is a narrative-driven single-player action-adventure game with a sprawling open world and light RPG mechanics, or a semi-open world, or even just a linear experience that is just pretty to look at, but it's usually on rails and pseudo-intellectual at best, and 9 times out of 10, it's got an over-the-shoulder camera. Now, I actually like these games a lot and enjoy them for what they are, but make no mistake, the formula has gotten stale, and the last thing a Resident Evil 4 Remake ever needs is to be stale. Reason number two, here's the problem. Resident Evil 4 did create a shift in the industry with the new camera angle, but it was hardly the first one to do so, or even the last one to do it. The franchise literally started in the first place by doing the same exact thing with fixed camera angles. And long after that, Resident Evil 7 somehow found a way to reinvent the franchise the second time by combining the gameplay from Resident Evil 1 and 4 and combined it with parts that worked in Outlast to create the first game that solidified the idea that first-person horror games can actually be proper survival horror games and not just walking simulators. See, this is the thing. Resident Evil's identity as a franchise no longer revolves around a singular gameplay style or perspective. Resident Evil's identity is that it's a shapeshifter. In a weird sort of meta way, Resident Evil as a franchise is as much of a survivor as much as its characters are. And because of this flexibility to adapt, Resident Evil can technically do whatever it wants, including choosing any of the 3 camera styles available. So here's an idea, why not all of them? Resident Evil as a series has struck gold 3 different times with 3 different gameplay perspectives, and yet for one reason or another, it's yet to find a way to combine all 3 of them into a single gaming experience. It's a tricky endeavor, no doubt, but there's more than enough evidence to prove that it can work. Far more technically ambitious games like Grand Theft Auto 5 and especially Red Dead Redemption 2 have been doing it for years now, and to a far less effective degree, Bethesda's been doing it since like, what, 2008? Starting with Fallout 3. Then you have The Evil Within 2, which allows you to switch between third and first-person perspectives from the menu. And this might sound like a weird one, but the Fatal Frame and the Siren series did this as well, juggling between fixed camera angles and the first-person perspective when the situation called for it. In all fairness, none of these games that I've listed do all 3 cameras at once, but they managed to hit 2 out of 3. Can Resident Evil be the first game to include all 3 in one game? The answer, I believe to be yes, and there is a way that I strongly believe could work. Typically, Resident Evil games tend to do one of 2 things. They either let you select one of 2 characters for the entirety of a campaign, or they come up with one campaign that revolves around one protagonist, but then includes a segment where you play as a completely different character somewhere near the end. Sometimes the games just put you as Chris or Carlos, running out of bubblegum and punching heads off of everything like a boulder in the middle of nowhere. Other times you're just Ashley, tripping over everything and then resorting to screaming so loud the enemies will just combust without even needing to throw a lantern at them. So here's something I didn't know about Ashley's segment in Resident Evil 4 until recently, and there's a good chance somebody out there watching this has no idea either. In the Japanese version of Resident Evil 4, Ashley's part of the game actually keeps the fixed camera angles. More specifically, it uses the dynamic camera angles from Code Veronica, but it's still the same method of gameplay, so I'm gonna include it under the same branch of fixed camera angles. If there was one one part of Resident Evil 4 that would work 100% better with fixed angles, it's the one part of the game where you don't shoot diddly squat. The minute I discovered this was the minute I realized just how much I want a Resident Evil game with multiple perspectives. So here's a version of Resident Evil 4 Remake that I would want to see. The main campaign lets you switch between first-person and over-the-shoulder cameras anytime you want, ideally with the press of a button. There's a specific reason why I would pair these two cameras, and it's because they share the most similarities. You can't see enemies lurking behind corners, you can't see what's behind you either. This eliminates the need to create a different set of enemy placements to create effective tension, and even more importantly, both of these allow for precision and aiming. As for the fixed camera angles, that's a completely different story. Combat is 100% possible using this camera angle, but I find it to be a hit or miss, which, now that I think about it, for a system that uses lock-on aiming, that's pretty ironic. Now, I like these kinds of games as much as the next guy, but this is a real problem. I like it when survival horror limitations, like resource management, actually revolve around the idea that it is up to my capabilities as a player, whether I want to shoot like I was plugged into the Matrix, or to waste every bullet trying to be like Yosemite Sam, who somehow even misses the shots that hit. I find combat works better in games with this camera when it lets you move and shoot and doesn't give a crap about item management, like in the Silent Hill quadrilogy, which in my opinion that franchise did the fixed camera angles miles better than this series ever did. And that one's not even a survival horror game, that's a psychological horror game. Although Code Veronica does come real close, I'll give it that. The camera angles in that game are pretty sweet. But even then, these type of games work the best when combat is avoided altogether. And when it comes to survival horror, that's a major issue because that's not what the genre's about. That is the job of psychological horror games. Survival horror games are actually about fighting back, but at the cost of high stakes and severe consequences, so that when the obstacle does get overcome, it's super satisfying. The good news is Resident Evil's been branching out into psychological horror territory, even if lightly, and this could be a wonderful opportunity for Ashley's segment. This could go one of two ways. Option 1, give Ashley a segment that focuses on puzzle solving and running away, but keep it short and to a minimum so that it doesn't conflict with the pacing of the rest of the game. Option 2, you take out Ashley's segment and then flesh it out into an unlockable side campaign. Remember how Luis Serra gave Leon the medicine to suppress the Las Plagas? What if it doesn't happen in the remake and Leon and Ashley have to find it themselves? If there's a way to put Ashley on her own, like make Leon pass out from the infection or an injury or something, Ashley could take over for quite a bit and prove to be useful. Can you even begin to imagine just how awesome it would be if Ashley ran around the castle looking for keys, solving puzzles, and hiding under beds or in closets? All that would be left is to get the wolf that was stuck in the bear trap in the castle as well, have Ashley call him Huey, and it might as well be a remake of Haunting Ground. If I remember correctly, that was going to be the idea for the original Resident Evil 4. If that happens in the remake, that would be like coming full circle, and that's awesome. So, to summarize, I think Resident Evil 4 Remake should offer both first-person and third-person options in the main campaign, and then offer a side campaign or even just a small segment designed around the good old classic camera angles. Doing it this way would mean that the camera angles will not clash or undermine one another. This could also be the first time fans of all three styles end up getting what they always wanted. And what better time to do that than with the remake of a game that wasn't afraid to push the boundaries. Do keep in mind though, this is all just wishful thinking in the end. Would it be amazing? Absolutely. Will the game actually be like this though? Most likely answer is, in my dreams. However, this could be the best opportunity in a long time for the series going forward. After all, Resident Evil 4's greatest legacy is the massive shockwave of innovation that the industry can still feel down to its core. Maybe the best way the remake can ever honor that legacy is not to replicate what worked phenomenally 20 years ago, but to innovate as well. And with that, the Raven draws to a conclusion. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.